At 8:40 in the morning on August 26, 2026, the roof of the world cracked open. High above the frontier where Nepal meets China's Tibet Autonomous Region, a slab of rock and glacial ice battered for years by a warming atmosphere it never evolved to withstand finally let go. It fell into a river valley few outsiders have ever seen, and in doing so, it ended hundreds of lives, some of them still uncounted, in the time it takes to read this sentence. By the time the water reached the villages downstream, there was no warning siren, no evacuation order, no time. There was only a wall. Survivors describe it the same way, again and again, a roar first, then the ground itself seeming to move. Within minutes, a wave of mud, boulders and shattered ice tore down the Lunda River known on the Nepali side as the Botakoshi, before slamming into the Trishuli River system and rolling on toward Rasua and Nuwakot districts. Nepal's National Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Authority has pieced together the sequence using satellite imagery from Planet Labs. Their preliminary read, a glacial rock landslide occurred roughly 20 kilometers northeast of the Rasuagati border crossing, dumping enough debris into the Lende to transform a mountain river into something closer to wet concrete moving at highway speed. What triggered the collapse is still being argued over by scientists thousands of miles apart. Some Nepali officials point to a magnitude 4.4 earthquake on the Chinese side of the border, recorded just minutes before the flood surge began, as the likely spark that shook loose an already unstable mass of rock and ice. But the U.S. Geological Survey has pushed back on that theory entirely, stating flatly that no earthquake occurred, and attributing the disaster instead to a straightforward glacial collapse, a chunk of ice breaking free and crashing down a slope already saturated by monsoon rain. Either way, the mountain had been waiting to fail. Saswata Sanyal, a disaster risk reduction specialist at the International Center for Integrated Mountain Development (ICIMOD) in Kathmandu, noted that this is not new territory for the Lenda Kola. The same river system flooded catastrophically just over a year ago, in July 2025, when a superglacial lake burst on the Chinese side and tore away the very same friendship bridge that has now vanished a second time. This time, Sanyal said, an ice rock avalanche on the Nepal side blocked the river outright before releasing its load downstream in one violent surge, the second such flood on this stretch of water in 14 months. For the people who live in its shadow, the Himalaya is no longer simply beautiful. It is becoming unpredictable in a way that terrifies even those who have spent their whole lives beneath it. Nearly 2 days on, nobody can say with confidence how many people the flood took. The numbers have moved so fast, and so far, that even wire services covering the story in real time have had to revise their own reporting within hours. The earliest dispatches out of Kathmandu on Wednesday spoke of single digits 9 dead, then dozens. By Wednesday night, Nepali authorities were confirming at least 160 deaths, with roughly 900 people still unaccounted for. Some outlets tracking the disaster's live progression have since reported the toll climbing past 270 confirmed dead, with more than 300 people missing among them, at least 700 foreign nationals caught in one of the world's most popular high-altitude trekking corridors at the worst possible moment. Why the wild swings in the count? Communications infrastructure across the disaster zone was among the first casualties. Cell towers, fiber lines, and the roads rescue crews would normally use to physically reach isolated communities were all swept away or buried within the flood's first minutes. Entire villages went dark simultaneously. For hours, officials in both Kathmandu and Lhasa were operating nearly blind, reliant on scattered satellite phone calls, aerial reconnaissance, and whatever fragments of video managed to escape the region before the networks failed completely. That fog of war is part of why the final toll may not be known for days, possibly longer. Rescue crews are still working through terrain that was reshaped, in some places unrecognizably, in the space of a single morning. If one image has come to define this disaster, it's the collapse of the Maitari Bridge, the Friendship Bridge, which for decades has physically linked Nepal's customs post at Rasuagati to China's Gurong port on the opposite bank. Surveillance footage from the crossing, since verified by multiple international outlets, shows the flood's arrival in horrifying real time. Rows of parked buses and cargo trucks lifted and flung aside as if they weighed nothing. Crowds of people scrambling uphill with nowhere left to run. And then, within moments, the bridge itself giving way to the current. It is a scene the region has now lived through twice. The same bridge was destroyed in July 2025 by a nearly identical combination of monsoon rain and glacial lake failure. It had only recently been rebuilt. Jairong Port is not a minor crossing. On an ordinary day, it handles close to a third of all trade moving between China and Nepal, and it doubles as the primary overland gateway for pilgrims heading toward Mount Kailash and Lake Manasaravar, as well as trekkers bound for Nepal's Langtang Valley. When the bridge went, so did the last physical thread connecting these communities to the outside world during the exact hours they needed it most. It took Chinese emergency responders roughly 22 hours to physically fight their way back to Jairong Port at all, hampered by mudslide-choked roads and debris fields that swallowed entire sections of highway. The flood didn't just take bridges and buildings, it gutted a meaningful slice of Nepal's power supply in a matter of minutes. The Nepal Electricity Authority has confirmed damage to 6 major hydropower and transmission facilities in the disaster zone: the Rasuagadi and Chilame hydropower stations, the Trishuli 3A and 3B facilities including the critical 220 kV hub substation, along with the older Trishuli and Devegad hydropower stations further downstream. For a country that depends heavily on Himalayan rivers to keep the lights on in Kathmandu, the loss lands hard, and rolling blackouts have already begun rippling through parts of Bagmati province as engineers scramble to assess what, if anything, can be salvaged before the next monsoon surge arrives. Among the hundreds of foreign nationals swept into this disaster, one group's story has unfolded with particular anguish: a team of South Korean engineers building the Upper Trishuli 1 hydropower plant, deep in the heart of Rasua district, the exact ground zero of the flood. When the water hit, it didn't just threaten the workers, it tore through the weir and destroyed much of the project's base camp, the very infrastructure meant to house and protect them. South Korea's foreign ministry confirmed that 8 employees of Korea Southeast Power, KON, and Doosan Enerbility went missing when the flood struck, while another 10 workers were stranded and awaiting helicopter evacuation. By Thursday, as the picture sharpened, the numbers shifted again. Of 21 Korean employees connected to the project, 16 had been on site when the water hit. 10 were confirmed safe after evacuating alongside roughly 200 Nepali and other foreign workers, and are now waiting for further support out of the area. But 6 remained out of contact, including 1 locally hired Korean employee split between 6 Doosan Enerbility staff and 3 from KON. The corporate response arrived within hours. Doosan Enerbility's CEO, Jung Yun-in, personally led a team of 8 company officials from Incheon Airport to Nepal on Thursday to support search and rescue work and assess the wreckage at the construction site firsthand. KON dispatched 6 additional employees from its headquarters for the same purpose. Both companies say they've stood up emergency task forces working directly with Nepali authorities and project partners on the ground. The Korean government, for its part, escalated the response to the highest level. President Lee Jae-myung ordered an all-out mobilization, directing the Foreign Ministry, National Fire Agency, and National Police Agency to assemble a joint rapid response team for deployment to Nepal. According to presidential spokesperson Kang Yoo-jung, Lee's instruction was blunt: mobilize every available resource, treat the safety of Korean nationals as the top priority, and work hand-in-hand with Nepali authorities to prevent further harm. What makes this disaster distinct from an ordinary natural catastrophe is that no single government can fully own the response. The river that destroyed these communities doesn't recognize the border it crossed. On the Nepali side, the Army, Nepal Police, and Armed Police Force have all been mobilized for search, rescue, and relief work, backed by helicopters and medical teams racing against deteriorating weather and unstable ground. Nepal has issued flood warnings for communities strung along the rivers in Rasua, Nuwakot, Pading, Gorkha, and Chitwan districts, a chain of vulnerability running most of the way from the border to the outskirts of Kathmandu itself. In Tibet, Chinese President Xi Jinping has publicly called for sustained efforts to locate the missing, alongside a broader commitment to improving disaster monitoring and early warning systems for the future, an acknowledgement, however brief, that this stretch of border may need infrastructure built for a climate that no longer behaves the way it once did. China's own emergency services in Gyeongsang County are contending with the same broken roads and buried infrastructure, slowing rescue efforts on the Nepali side. In a mirror image of the same catastrophe, international support has begun arriving in pledges, if not yet in full force. The European Union and India are both reported to be preparing humanitarian aid packages, and the U.S. State Department issued a formal statement of condolence to victims' families, alongside a pledge of financial support, given the significant number of American trekkers believed to be among the missing. Underneath the scramble to count bodies and restore power lines sits a harder, slower-moving story. This mountain range is changing beneath the people who call it home. and it is not changing in their favor. The Lenda Colas flood in July 2025, and this catastrophe just 13 months later, are not, in the eyes of scientists who study the region, a coincidence. They are a pattern. Warming temperatures at extreme altitude are destabilizing permafrost that has held mountainsides together for millennia, and as that grip loosens, rock and ice are increasingly finding their way into river valleys with nowhere to safely go. Communities that built their lives, their trade routes and their pilgrimage paths around these rivers over generations are now living downstream of a hazard that didn't used to exist in this form, at this frequency. As night fell over Rasua on Wednesday, rescue teams from both nations were still working the wreckage under freezing conditions, searching for signs of life beneath the mud by headlamp. Families on both sides of a border that for a few catastrophic hours effectively ceased to exist are waiting for news that may not come for days if it comes at all. The bridge will likely be rebuilt again, as it was after 2025. Whether the mountains above it can be trusted to stay still long enough for that bridge to matter is a question nobody currently has an answer to.